So good morning students. So I am here to discuss Harlem Renaissance, its effect on the United States, how it started, and some of the most notable writers of that movement. So let's get into it. But before we dig deeper into our discussion, here are the learning objectives of this lesson. So first, at the end of the lessons, the student should be able to understand the essence of Harlem Renaissance, identify the movement's influence to modern literature, and lastly, familiarize with some of the most notable writers of this period. Now let us now proceed to the proper discussion. So first of all, what is Harlem Renaissance? So Harlem Renaissance that span in 1918 to 1930 is a flowering of African American literature, art, and music during the 1920s in the New York City. W. E. Du Bois, the soul of the black folk, anticipated the movement, which included Alain Locke's anthology The New Negro, Zora Neale Hurston's novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, and the poetry of Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen. Take note that this literary movement belongs to the modern period. So the 1920s saw the emergence of Harlem Renaissance, a cultural movement centered in New York City's Harlem neighborhood. This period is regarded as the most significant in the history of American African literature and was a time of enormous inventiveness in the performing, artistic, and literary arts. As members of the New Negro movement welcomed their African roots and embraced self-expression while rejecting long-standing and frequent demeaning stereotypes, the Harlem Renaissance served as an aesthetic peak of the movement. So next is, how did the Harlem Renaissance start? So in the early 20th century, millions of African Americans migrated from the rural south to the urban north to seek economic opportunity and escape widespread racial prejudice, segregation, and violence. Many of them settled in the New York City's neighborhood of Harlem, which became the epicenter of a flowering of African American culture known as the Harlem Renaissance. So alongside their contemporaries in theater, dance, music, and arts, racist stereotypes were effectively destroyed by writers who also expressed their pride in their African ancestry and contributed to the development of a new understanding of Black life and identity in the United States. So additionally, the writing of the Harlem Renaissance brought much needed attention to the painful legacies of racism, slavery, and laying the groundwork for the subsequent civil rights movement of the later decades. So here are some of the most notable writers of this period. First, we have Langston Hughes, who is born in 1901 and died in 1967. He's born in Joplin, Missouri. So Langston Hughes moved around a lot as a kid until his family settled in Cleveland, Ohio. He wrote his first and most famous poem, The Negro Speaks the River, soon as after graduating from college. So this is the literary piece of The Negro Speaks the River by Langston Hughes. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So the poem, The Negro Speaks the River, celebrate Black art culture. So the author summarized significant moment in the race's history in just 13 lines of rivers. The Negro speaker, a kind of everyman for the Black race, gives Hughes a list of the rivers he has traveled. So he absorbed Harlem culture while attending Columbia University in New York City, notably the popular jazz and blues music, which he eventually blended so brilliantly into his work, starting with his first collection, The Weary Blue of 1926. In addition to essays, novels, short stories, and plays that all emphasized and glorified Black life and pride in the African American ancestry, Hughes was the most significant and well-known voice of the Harlem Renaissance. So, The Weary Blues is a poem that explores the strength and suffering of Black art. This poem tells the story of blues musician in Harlem who performs late at night and whose music expressed a suffering of residing in a racist society. So let us now proceed to the second most notable writer, Zora Neale Hurston, who was born in 1891 and died in 1960. So she attended Howard University and won a scholarship to Barnard College in 1925, which brought her into the heart of Harlem culture. She is a trained anthropologist who traveled to Haiti and Jamaica for research. So Hurston gained attention in 1930 for her collection of African American folktales of Mules and Men of 1935 and her 1937 novels Their Eyes Were Watching God about the tumultuous life of the black woman in the rural South. So The Mules of Men of 1935 is an attempt to present the stories from an insider's perspective. Zora Neale Hurston, an African American author, published a book titled Mules of Men in 1935. So this collection might be seen as a counterweight to Harry's Uncle Remus collection. So The Mules and Men is a 1935 autoethnographical collection of African American folktale collected and written by anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston. So the book explores stories she collected into two trips, one in Eatonville and Polk County, Florida, and one in New Orleans. So the second is Their Eyes Were Watching God. So this is the epic tale of Janie Crawford, whose quest for identity takes her on a journey during which she learned that love is experience life's joys and sorrow and come home to herself in peace. So one of the most important works of the 20th century American literature. So Zora Neale Hurston's beloved 1937 classic The Eyes Were Watching God is an enduring southern love story sparkling with wit, beauty, and heartfelt wisdom, told in a captivating voice of a woman who refuses to live in sorrow, bitterness, fear, or foolish romantic dreams. Is a story of fair-skinned, fiercely independent Janie Crawford and her evolved being selfhood through three marriages and a life marked by poverty, trial, and purpose. So, third writer is Countee Cullen, who is born in 1903 and died in 1946. So while attending the New York University, Countee Cullen began publishing his poem In the Crisis, the literary magazine of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, co-founded by W.E.B. Du Bois. So he soon won a scholarship to Harvard and won widespread acclaim for his debut poetry collection Colors of 1925. So here is the Colors of 1925. In the color, Countee Cullen exhibits an unmistakably lyric gift that is out of the ordinary. It will be easy to overpraise him, for it is not often that man of his blood reveals so deep and so modern a sensitive to a poetic urge, and so his excellence stands out of all the more vividly. He still has some distance to go before he reaches any particular high eminence as a poet, but what he was accomplished in the color leads to the suspicion that if he is not spoiled by over-adulation during these early years, he would produce distinguished and lasting work. So Cullen was unapologetically influenced by his work by a romantic poet like John Keats. After his poetic reputation waned in the 1930s, Cullen taught 4 years in New York City public school. So lastly is Claude McKay. So was born in 1889 and died in 1948. So born in Jamaica, Claude McKay came to the United States to attend college but left school in 1914 and settled in Harlem. After publishing If We Must Die, one of his best-known poems, in 1919 he traveled in Europe and lived in London, returning to the United States in 1921. So here is the piece of If We Must Die by Claude McKay. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while around us barks the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monster we defy shall be constrained to honor us true dead. O kinsmen, we must meet a common foe. Through far outnumbered bird, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What true before us lies an open grave. Like men will face the murderous cowardly pack, press the wall of undying but fighting back. So we must to analyze this. In 1922, establish him as a major voice of a Harlem Renaissance and an influence on younger writers like Hughes. A Home to Harlem of 1928, which is about a young army deserter during World War I, became the first commercially successfully novel by a black writer. McKay followed up with two more novels, Banjo of 1929 and Banana Bottom of 1933. So for the assignment, here is the direction. Among the questions mentioned below, choose one and make an essay about them. So the first question is, what is Harlem Renaissance? Second is, how did this literary movement influence the latter civil rights movement? And lastly, among the mentioned literary piece, what did you think contributed to the empowerment of black culture? You may pass this assignment on our next meeting. So here is a famous quotation of this movement. An artist must be free to choose what he does, certainly, but he must also never be afraid to do what he might choose, by Langston Hughes. So then again, this is Sir Mark, and thank you for listening.